Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider here. It's the Fantasy Football Show with myself, Matthew Coller, and Mike Schopp, WGR 550, and the Deep End Fantasy Football Podcast, and the show presented by our friends at Underdog Fantasy, the easiest place to play fantasy sports. Also, the fastest growing fantasy app in the industry. We'll have our pick'ems at the end of the show. Cannot wait for that. Make sure you go over and use the all right, I forgot what the Thursday night game is, but we will get to that. Sign up with the code PURPLE to claim your special pick and first-time deposit offer of $1,000 in bonus cash, up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Must be 18 or older. Terms apply. Concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. Yeah, Aaron Rodgers, I'd rather be on a darkness retreat than watch him play football again. And yet they could not shift the Thursday night game. But nonetheless,
those are the rules, Matt. Those are the rules.
Yeah. All right. I need your thoughts on Anthony Richardson, unless you want to tap out.
Yeah. I mean, it's a shame because there's really no reason that makes sense apart from culture-y protocol kind of stuff from what he did in that moment that justifies this move. I mean, they weren't even losing this year. Like he has not been this is the understatement of the history of Purple Insider. He's not been efficient as a passer, and until 2 games ago, he also didn't really want to scramble, or maybe that was from the sideline. I don't know. You just can't spend a top 4 draft pick on a quarterback and give up so fast. I saw yesterday online, it isn't original, but Richardson has had 10 starts and Daniel Jones has had 71. Like, you can't do this. You want him to watch? He spent the last 12 games last year watching. You just can't. He has to play. And I know I can appreciate how challenging that would be, what a conundrum that would be for a coach who's got not a bad record. Like, who's going to be the 7 seed in the AFC? Somebody we think is terrible is going to be that team, or the Bengals, or if they're not terrible. And so you got to keep going, and that's probably what breaks ties here. I'm on your show every week because of fantasy football, and this is such a loss for fantasy football. The whole year has been, because of the points I made. And, even last year too, the whole Richardson idea. Well, look how it started. I mean, he's running for the game he got hurt in Houston that ended his season. He was Derrick Henry times 5. Like, it was a joke. And on the he ran for 2 touchdowns in 5 minutes. And on the second one, he's out for the year now. Like, that was just the end of it. He had, a quarterback sneak in the opener that he got hurt and left the game. So I don't know what's in his head. And of course, I have to acknowledge the Colts people would know that better than I do. But fantasy-wise, it's a disaster. Like, it really, what a moment this is for that. With Indianapolis, Minnesota, Sunday night, flexed game, Flacco, Darnold, he'll be compared against Darnold and like another reclamation project. Went to the playoffs last year with the Browns. He's going to drop back 55 times because that's the brand. And the question becomes, again, in sort of a fantasy context, whether Richardson ever gets back to a regular starting role. And it's no given, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this whole idea of quarterback development has really come under the light this year. I mean, Sam Darnold, as much as there have been some warts throughout the year, the man has 107.2 quarterback rating through 7 games, which you could almost predict a little bit, not that it would be quite this good, but that it would be much better than it had ever been before because of the circumstances that he was given and the development year that he had with the San Francisco 49ers. And what kept coming up for people yesterday when he was benched was Kevin O'Connell saying that quarterbacks don't fail organizations, organizations fail quarterbacks. And I don't always believe in that because, I mean, Jaden Daniels went to about the worst organization in the history of our planet, and yet he's turned them around. So the chicken and egg thing is always difficult here, but case by case basis. When Jaden Daniels was the same age as Anthony Richardson with a pretty similar skill set, the guy was barely throwing the ball at Arizona State. He wasn't a good thrower really at all. And by the time he's drafted, he's 24 years old. And I think, for Bo Nix, I mean, that guy was brutal at Auburn, and he's had a good rookie season at 24 years old. And here were the Vikings saying, we're not really going to play JJ McCarthy. And I'm sure that after 2 losses, people would have been starting to push or whatever, maybe even after the Jets game when it wasn't very good. So it's almost a favor to JJ McCarthy that they can't do it. But to throw in Anthony Richardson at the start of his career when he was so clearly a development project, and then even this year when you have another starter, but if you didn't do it, if he didn't play, the world would have lost its mind. The owner is nuts in Indianapolis. So that's another problem that they face there as well. I have said, Mike, that the Packers thing with Jordan Love, there's a raw prospect who threw a ton of interceptions at Utah State and is now a really good quarterback. The reason the Packers get away with it is because they don't have owners. They don't have a crazy person who comes in and says, you have to play this guy. And I think that everyone around the league sort of knows that Sam Darnold at 20 years old should not have been playing. It should have been a veteran quarterback. That's why he was seeing ghosts. And then the guys have these embarrassing moments and these bad things happen to them. Their confidence gets shot. It falls apart. Because when I was watching Richardson the other day, I thought, this is not confident at all. This guy looks like he's half of what he was last year in terms of his self-belief. And I think it's better for him. It actually does remind me a little bit, if you're looking for a situation where the guy was benched and came back and turned out to be good, maybe of like Tua in Miami, where he had the thing with Flores and it wasn't working out and it looked really bad. And then he gets the right circumstance. Yeah. And I saw Ryan Fitzpatrick tweeting about that this morning saying like, look, like you have to just give these people time. But I don't know. Does Anthony Richardson show up with the, I don't know, the Seattle Seahawks or something in 3 years and then have a good season? It's been very frustrating with the lack of patience that these quarterbacks are given, especially one that you knew needed development time.
Well, that's all right. The flip side of it is that in terms of the ticking clock on the rookie deal, and you can win a Super Bowl with a $50 million quarterback. Kansas City has just done it, but you'd rather do it with a $10 million quarterback and spend all that money on weapons and whatever you think is right. So it's also it's right to want to sit and develop quarterbacks. We have countless examples of that seemingly being beneficial. We don't know for sure because they didn't play. That's the point in the first place. But it's also organizationally, contractually, you got to get Drake May on the field because you have to find out. It's very much plus EV if he's good. And then you have kind of 4 to 5 free years to go try to win championships. And if he's not, you can bail. You can go with Bryce Young, but you have to play him. And so I don't know, like, who should be in charge of that. The owner runs the team, and the owner is the last person in most organizations to care about any of this stuff at all. In Buffalo, we talk about, well, I mean, not all the time, but when the Bills lose a game or two, they lose in the playoffs, it's like, come on, they have to move on from Sean McDermott. Like, do you think Terry Pagula, who owns the Bills, knows the first point you're making about why they have to do that? He was a wrestler. He gave the Bills credibility for the first time in like 30 years. And what, he's going to fire him because they lost in the playoffs? No, he's not going to. He's not even thinking about that. So how these decisions get made, who makes them, ownership, which can be, I mean, Irsay, what hasn't been said. It's not going to be rational. It's not going to be logical. It's not going to make sense all the time. If you owned a team, if you or I owned a team, the conversation we have before that draft last year is whether we are prepared to handle the turbulence when it comes to Richardson in that case, because there will almost definitely have to be some. And what do we tell our other players? Do players want to come to our team? Is my coach fired in 2 years if they go 2-30 or something? Like, all that stuff has to sort of be plotted, and you can't know. And so that is the kind of thing where there's a lot of different possible outcomes, and probably most of them are bad. But you still do it. You still do it because the upside is the point. That's what you're in it for. You're trying to win a championship, and you do that by drafting Josh Allen out of Wyoming and just crossing your fingers. And then if you are right, quote right, then you all go to the Hall of Fame.
Right.
The upside is just too immense.
Hang on. Let me silence my phone real quick so I can tell you that Us Days at US Cellular is back again. Exclusive offers just for customers, just to say thanks. Right now, you'll get $1,200 off any phone plus $400 off any tablet. Amazing, right? But my family is so excited about their new devices, they keep texting me during the show. They're all about Us Days deals like $1,200 off any phone, $400 off any tablet. Terms apply. Visit uscellular.com for details. Right. I think with these quarterbacks, you can't have 1 foot in, 1 foot out. You have to decide which way you're going to go with it. We've seen it work for Josh Allen to fight through it, where the start of his career, I would say through the first 2 seasons, was pretty gnarly. You saw some of his winning ability, and you also saw some of his wild throwing, and he needed a couple of off seasons of really hard work to get to be able to throw. Of course, Richardson hurt his shoulder, which is going to set you back from a guy who needed a million reps of trying to throw the football. And we've seen it work with guys who sit on the bench, who are raw type of players and then come in later. It's pretty convincing to me that the greatest quarterback didn't play right away. And then the greatest quarterback of the previous decade didn't play right away. I think that does kind of sell me a little bit. But no one ever does it.
Peyton Manning, I'm not going to, it's your show. Peyton Manning did play right away, and he is the greatest ever. Yeah.
He did. But you know, Rodgers and the fact that it worked with Jordan Love, but if the guy's not good, it's not going to work. I mean, it didn't work for Paxton Lynch. Like, it's not going to work for every single person all the time. Nothing will, but you have to decide. I think that's your point is, okay, if you're going to play him, you have to understand that you're going to lose some games where you come out of it going, what just happened to us? How did we lose that game? The quarterback played so bad, and fight through those in order to try to get to the end of the tunnel. I think to the rookie contract point, I think that's actually gone over the top because no rookies ever win. And usually it's year 3, year 4 where these guys, and you've seen it with Allen, fully develop into who they're going to be. And so there's too much of, well, we've got to take advantage of him being cheap now. But if he's not good enough, you're not taking advantage of it anyway. If he's not ready to play, all you're doing is kind of wasting time. And I do think that, you know, spending a lot of time around these folks in a football locker room, one thing that's hard to understand is how many people are involved in an NFL organization, and everybody's got an opinion and everybody's got a say. And when somebody takes themselves out of a football game in a key spot because they're tired, the amount of anger inside of the building, from the locker room all the way up to the owner's box, to the executives, to the front office, to everybody else, every single person is going to be talking about that. And every family of every player is going to be talking to their guy about the quarterback doing that. I don't think a young quarterback can even conceptualize how much attention is on them and how much is riding on their shoulders. And so when you do something like that, it manipulates kind of every single person in the organization, and you can't keep going with it. Like, they had to take a break here. They had to. They can't keep going after that. It's just too embarrassing and angering to everybody, especially in the locker room. So I think they did the right thing, because then they can say, look, he's young. We're going to give him a break here and then reset, because otherwise it would be tough to kind of buy into him going into this next stretch where they can make the playoffs.
I suppose. I talk to Ross Tucker every week on my show on WGR, and he said, like, I've never seen anything like it. So I'm sure you're right when it comes to the players and the precedent or the lack thereof of what happened on Sunday. But when you and I work together, I don't know, I probably inflate my ego a little bit by this, but I latched on to the fourth down strategy mistakes, like the broad brush mistakes that teams were making in the NFL, and the Bills were always losing and they were an underdog all the time. Like, why wouldn't you just think differently? What is stopping them from thinking differently? And so I think like it sort of reminds me of that, because there's an evolution that happens. And for the Colts now, I don't know if I want them to win. Like in those Bills years, it was sometimes logical to me to think it's better off if they lose, because then they'll make the change. Then they'll draft the quarterback. Then they'll make the coach, whatever. And now I've got Joe Flacco, and what's my ceiling? I'm just trying to not be embarrassed. So I don't know, like what optimal decision-making here is. There's a certain ingrained way of being, of thinking in the NFL that this runs counter to with Richardson, but you're not playing for the ceiling anymore, and that's why you drafted him, is to shoot for the moon, and that's over.
I do follow some folks who are Colts fans, and they were sharing the memes of the banner that says, win 8-9 with Joe Flacco. And that's true. That is true. It is a little bit of like, congratulations on your 9-8 season that you have no chance to win with Joe Flacco. But at least you, I guess, didn't embarrass yourself with Anthony Richardson. Did you actually get ahead at all? But for this particular Sunday night football game, Mike, they did get ahead. Flacco has played pretty well this year at times. And if you're the Vikings, you were really hoping that the guy would come in and go 10 for 34 passing, and then you could get a fairly easy win against Indianapolis. They do have receivers. And from a fantasy perspective, that this does matter to them against the team that has been struggling a little bit against veteran quarterbacks who got the football out.
I can't think of a more drastic difference between the starter and the backup, the two quarterbacks, than this. You could not play, and in retrospect, this proved correct. You could not play Michael Pittman in fantasy. You couldn't play Downs was the closest to being the exception. Couldn't play him. You've got Alec Pierce, who had these sort of long shot plays with Richardson. Downs had one on Sunday as well. I mean, Richardson was 2 for 15, I believe, but he had like 80 yards, including 70 yards to Downs on one play. Downs is legit good, I think. So, yeah, and now you want to play all of them because Flacco is 50 dropbacks. What that does for Jonathan Taylor in fantasy is interesting. If we knew Flacco were to stay in the rest of the season, I guess Taylor, you have to play Jonathan Taylor. You want to, because of when you drafted him and how good he is. But maybe he's sort of immune. He's the one guy on that offense who might be immune to this change. You don't want Anthony Richardson stealing all his touchdowns either. But yeah, like you couldn't play the Colts guys, and now you can't wait to.
Yeah, the running game is a little different. There was something from PFF a couple years ago about the quarterback, if it's a running quarterback, impacting the running back in a positive way. And I think we're seeing this from Saquon Barkley in Philadelphia. We're certainly seeing it from Derrick Henry. And I think of it for Jonathan Taylor that his job just got more difficult because opposing teams do not have to factor the quarterback into the mix. That might be the only change. He also might be too good for that to matter a whole lot. And they have an offensive line that's really good at run blocking. That might be part of it. I can't decide if the Vikings have a decent run defense. The metrics are good, but they have also been up in games so much that opposing teams just haven't really run. And Kyron Williams had some success. I like him. I mean, in person, I always have kind of different opinions when I see someone in person. He was very good against the Vikings. The 49ers got some yards against them. The Lions certainly got some yards against them on the ground. I think you can run on this Vikings defense.
Well, I defer to you on that. I mean, Flacco, however, in terms of this matchup, is not one of these, if you will, sort of bum backups. And Taylor can work out fine, even if he doesn't have as much like lighter boxes, the kinds of things that maybe Henry or Barkley are benefiting from. If he gets into the end zone, then you win. And a quarterback that's going to take chances, even if it works out negatively. That's why everybody in fantasy football was dying for Jameis Winston to play. because even if you get picks, that's still good. You want the 300 yards, you want the points. So again, in terms of that context, Taylor could be fine here if they get into the red zone, because what else are they going to do with Joe Flacco at quarterback than give the ball to Jonathan Taylor? I mean, tight ends are not even really a thing with the Colts. They've had like 4 at a time the last 5 years, but I don't know. Nobody ever does anything, it seems. So I'm okay with Taylor. My thought on the Vikings is this was coming. That was a tough spot on Thursday night when we talked last week, like we talked about Cooper Kupp coming back and whether he actually would, because there was trade rumor stuff about him. But then not only do you get Kupp, you get Nakua, and they both looked super healthy, and it came pretty easy. Still a winnable game for Minnesota, right down to the safety, which was egregious. But that's the league. They weren't going to run away with it. We'll see now as we get to the second half what happens in that NFC North. I mean, everybody's at least pretty good. If you want to eliminate the Bears, feel free. But Detroit, Green Bay this week, so good. It's a great division, and the Vikings are very much a part of it in the race.
I would love your opinion on something that we have been discussing, which is a crossover with fantasy and the X's and O's. Is the Vikings against the Rams only ran 50 plays, and Jordan Addison only had a couple catches. And Jordan Addison was part of our offseason discussion leading into the season of, hey, is he going to get suspended? Is he going to still be a target for Sam Darnold? And my original thought was, oh yeah, he's going to be a target for Sam Darnold. They're going to throw him the ball. They drafted him in the first round. They love him, and they love him enough to never punish him when he gets in trouble. And this is not going to be an issue. And his court date, unsurprisingly, got moved back. So it will be next year when that suspension comes down, if any suspension comes down at all. Pretty predictable, though. They're 5-0, and that court date disappears. But he has not gotten very many targets. And the reason, I think, is because they're just not throwing all that many passes. This kind of reminds me of Denver Broncos, Brian Griese and Jake Plummer, where they took guys that were not the greatest quarterbacks, but had some things they could do well, and they pared it down. They ran the football a lot. They ran a ton of play action. They took shots down the field, and they got really efficient quarterback play, but it was not volume quarterback play. I'm curious about your take on that as it pertains to someone like Addison, when we know that TJ Hawkinson is coming back as well.
Yeah, right. Well, I feel like Addison, you still can start him. I want to, because I think the overall, with everything you said, is still it's Kevin O'Connell. And I don't know if it's Sunday night, but it could be where you're playing teams that can score and that are like kind of that way. When you play the Bears or somebody, like I'm thinking of the Colts now, but some of these games, you talk about the volume of number of plays, they just get really bogged down, and you just don't get there in fantasy that way unless it's kind of a fluke. So I guess maybe fresh in my mind, Matthew, is what happened between these two teams 2 years ago. And that probably should not matter at all. The quarterbacks are different. The team's very different, but that was the wildest. And Taylor got hurt immediately in that game in Minnesota, that great comeback by the Vikings. I don't know. When I picture these two teams playing in that stadium, I see it's too recent. I just have this great feeling about it. And as we've talked about, the Flacco move is probably good for that kind of an outcome. I like Addison. I never have thought he was really great or anything. Of course, he pales to Jefferson, and that's sort of tough for him being on the same team, maybe if he thinks about it like that. But I would think, even with Hawkinson, you could get to a playable floor with Addison, but it's no sure thing. It never is.
Yeah, I think with Sam Darnold, it's always a little bit tricky, because you want to tell Sam Darnold to be aggressive because he has a huge arm. But then at times in his career where he's been very aggressive, he throws it to the other team. And some of his aggressive throws have been to the other team this year. So then you want him to okay, why don't you pare it back and duck underneath to the tight end, swing it out to Aaron Jones. Don't be pushing it too much unless it's to Justin Jefferson. So then Jefferson has this huge game against the Rams. But I was looking at a stat today, and I forget who tweeted out, one of the guys who does cool charts about the PFF separation grade versus how often the player is getting separation. And Jordan Addison is both getting separation all the time. I think it was maybe versus man coverage or something like that, getting separation all the time. And when the ball comes to him, being very efficient in doing so. And Sam Darnold seems to be not finding him, but also I looked at this as well. The Vikings are just not completing anywhere near as many passes. And some of that is Kirk games. Kirk games was you get behind by 14 points, then Kirk brings you back, and then he's throwing and throwing and throwing and throwing, and the receivers love it because their stats are through the roof and they're getting the football all the time. If you get a 17-point lead against the Jets in London and it's raining, you're just maybe not forcing the ball. And the Jets have, good secondary. They faced a lot of that. I think over the next couple of weeks, there's a ton of opportunity for that to open up for someone like Jordan Addison. And I think he just has to remain patient. But I just don't know that this is an offense that's going to throw 700 passes. I mean, Kirk in 2022, I believe, cleared 700 passes. That's not going to be how you do it with Sam Darnold.
It depends on their defense, largely. And if the defense is good, that's been the story. One of the stories of the season so far for Minnesota is Brian Flores and how much trouble he's given opposing quarterbacks. And if you're up 17 points, like you said, you just won't do it. You don't need to do it. But that defense fluctuates, and you have an injury, and then just different things sort of materialize, and you're playing in different game environments every week. So, you have Aaron Jones too. He's been really good for Minnesota. Hawkinson gets the extra week off. We thought maybe he would play last week, but they took it a little bit slower. They know what he's capable of. I still want to lean into the Vikings here. Who do they play in 2 weeks? Do you know?
That would be the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Let's go.
Yeah. Oh, and then Tennessee's after that. So
welcome to the AFC South portion
welcome
of
to
your
the
schedule.
AFC South. Did you happen to feast your eyes on Caleb Williams versus Jaden Daniels? I am curious about your take on that game, because the Hail Mary, and we could spend all day on how people just evaluate things, but the Hail Mary going wrong then resulted in tons of breakdowns about how the Bears had done everything wrong on the Hail Mary. I've seen that play work 5 times in my life, and it bounced to the guy. But it's like, well, they did this wrong, and they should have been sending this many people, and they should have dropped this guy back, and the guy should have been hyping up the crowd and everything else. Like, I don't know. It just bounced to the guy. It usually bounces and hits the ground. I don't know. I mean, some of the stuff is so funny about it. Just when something goes wrong in football, just someone has to pay for this. Someone did something really wrong. But the game overall was interesting because Daniels kind of struggled at times, maybe dealing with the rib injury. And Caleb Williams reminded everyone of what it used to look like at USC when things would go wrong, of just scrambling immediately and not seeing the field very well. Does that shape anything for you with either player?
Not really. I am disappointed that the Bears, with the so-called best collection of weapons ever afforded number 1 overall pick, has just not really gotten there at all. And the coordinator seems maybe to blame for that, Shane Waldron. Like, just a lot of, what you see on Twitter, a lot of what I see is just examples of how what they're running doesn't really make sense. I know that they got Gerald Everett back, which probably shouldn't matter to an offense with DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Rome Odunze, DeAndre Swift. Komet was working out fine, but no, they had to get Everett's snap share up, and just like these kind of things that coaches do. Nate Hackett with the Jets, just like they boggle the mind. So I certainly want to be optimistic, to say the least, for Williams going forward. I mean, he's still so young, but this year we drafted DJ Moore in the 3rd round, and that is not happening. And, Keenan Allen and Odunze at lesser prices, not happening. Daniels is the pick of the year in fantasy football, and the Hail Mary saves him. Why you don't play the crowd when the game is not over? Because the one time it does bounce, like, you just can never do that. And they're a team that how they compare to each other is kind of funny, because Washington doesn't have those names. They have McLaurin, who's not even on the DJ Moore level, I would say. He's good, but they don't really have anybody that you think of after that. They're throwing the ball to Zach Ertz all day. And Daniels is not running constantly, but his runs have value. And what are they, 6-2? So that looks very exciting. Daniels is the play. Daniels and Richardson, back to him, were always the conversation in the offseason. Like, I know Denny Carter, for one, at Roto-World would say, why draft Anthony Richardson when you can draft Jaden Daniels 6 rounds later and he's the same guy? And, I mean, he's been more than that so far this year. I mean, I think he's a legit MVP candidate. And a Hail Mary is the kind of narrative stuff that can help you get there if no one else is obvious. So I'm excited for my Daniels teams. Who he has going around him really just hasn't amounted to much, although Ertz is kind of back from the dead and he's playable. Chicago-wise, it's not as exciting. And they have Houston on Sunday night next week. So continuing, no offense meant, with these NFC North, AFC South matchups that I think the average fan sees them and asks themselves if these teams have ever played before.
Yeah, we were a little surprised at the flexing, but I think the flexing was, we've got to tell the Sam Darnold story, and then they lost 2 games in a row. So, because everyone at 5-0 was talking about him as an MVP.
And we have to get Jacksonville off.
Yes.
We have to get Jacksonville
run
off Sunday Night Football.
Far away from Jacksonville as you can. By the way, Adam Schefter just popped up on my phone, not texting me personally, but tweeting that Shane Steichen said it's Flacco going forward. So this is not a 1 week and then reassess type of thing. This may be many weeks for Joe Flacco and the end of Anthony Richardson for this year. But about Jaden Daniels, it really sticks in my brain because I spent so much time with the quarterback class leading up to the draft. When Kwesi Adofo-Mensah said that these guys who are 24 years old, that they've had basically minor league type of seasons and in college where they've been able to develop and almost treat it like they were in AAA, and to have Daniels come in and look like a pro quarterback right away at 24, and Nick's, for the most part, I mean, ups and downs, but has at times really looked like a pro quarterback as well, not with the upside of Daniels, but it just makes me think about it again, about how Anthony Richardson is the same age as Shadur Sanders. And it's and he's been in the league now for 2 years. He's just so much younger than someone like Jaden Daniels. And he is prepared. I think it says a lot about coaching though, as well. Obviously he's the one that's running the operation and throwing the ball and making spectacular plays, but this team has been poorly coached for, I don't know how long, poorly operated for how long. And Dan Quinn getting everybody to pull in the same direction and looking like an organized NFL football team. I think that it's also the right time for someone like Jaden Daniels to drop into a team like this when they do have no more Daniel Snyder and they do have Dan Quinn, who's been to a Super Bowl before. With Chicago, I just struggle with the whole coordinator thing because I'm not sure. I don't know if Shane Waldron's doing something wrong or if Caleb Williams can't see the field and just loves to scramble. And if that's his default, I honestly don't know. I mean, a lot of the people, it's kind of a thing with people who analyze the game, is they like to blame the coach for everything, but I'm not really like, what can I point to? What number do I have? What can I say? Because when I watch Caleb Williams, I go, that guy scrambled in like 1.4 seconds. There's no way that was supposed to be what he was doing. And that was really my biggest concern with Williams coming in, is how often he just bailed on the play entirely. And USC receivers would be like, okay, all right, well, I'm only getting it if I go 40 yards down the field and he's scrambling.
There are just so many variables. I mean, one, good luck to Minnesota without Darisaw. One, offensive line injury. The whole Darnold premise is like, if he's in a clean pocket with time, he's amazing, and if he's under any pressure, he's a disaster. And that's just like such a fine line. And so I remember this conversation about CJ Stroud at Ohio State, because he never had any sort of duress, was never under duress in the pocket. But then when he was, it was bad. Like he would bail and just sort of, it was chaos. So what do you do with that? He's going to go into the NFL on a team that's probably terrible because he's going to be drafted early. And what are the chances that they sort of afford him a clean pocket? Not great. But he sort of proved better than that immediately. And we really just did not have the evidence. You talk about what's actually happening and what it looks like. There was not much of a sample size on what he was as a player under duress. So, you just have to make your bet. Allen is interesting here. The Bills are thriving. And other teams like New Orleans, quintessentially, their entire offensive line is injured. Well, that should go well. And they can't do anything anymore, no matter who the quarterback is. Whereas the Bills, like their guys for 2 years in a row haven't missed a snap up front. Like Allen is Allen, so it's not so tenuous like a rookie would be. But still, like that's just a huge advantage that whether we're talking about how teams are really doing or how fantasy stats are looking is underappreciated, under-discussed, and can make all the difference.
So I know that often we end up on quarterbacks and talking about them through a fantasy lens, even though there are wide receivers and running backs who might be putting up more fantasy points or are more vital to people's teams. But I can't help it because it's always so interesting. And that's why, is because you're always trying to parse through what elements of what they're doing are influencing the quarterback and his performance. And with Josh Allen, getting Amari Cooper not only allows him to throw the ball to Amari Cooper, but it allows the attention to be drawn to him. And that is a very real thing. That's not like a football, man, they'll be double teaming. They do. Like they cloud coverages that way. They keep a safety over there. Like they know what Amari Cooper can do. And it wouldn't be surprising if suddenly everybody else starts looking a little bit better. There's a trickle down to that player, which is part of the reason we made fun of it so much, that the value of having that guy. But I was watching Allen this week thinking the Super Bowl has to happen for this guy at some point, right? I mean, he's just so good, so unstoppable of a force. And I questioned it in the offseason. Is this a regression year for Buffalo? Why did I do that? Because the best quarterbacks, the Brady, the Manning, the Elway, maybe Elway, a couple of years were not great, but I mean, almost every single year he's 70 games over 500 or something for his career. Like all the great quarterbacks are just a force, and that's what they do. And here he is again at the top of this conference. I'm not sold on Kansas City being good enough in the playoffs in their current form. Maybe with DeAndre Hopkins, it just seems like it's a collision course for Josh Allen and somebody again. And I'm starting to feel like maybe it's his year.
Well, he's certainly a candidate. He's the MVP favorite as we speak. I think it's very much the same conversation when it comes to Lamar Jackson. I think Jackson gets more blame, right or wrong, for playoff losses than Allen does so far in their respective careers. Kansas City, except for the fact that they have 3 Super Bowls in the last 5 years, they're on a track like the Titans were that year. I guess it's 3 years ago now when they ended up the 1 seed, and like nobody thought they were great, but they get a week off and they're playing at home, and they still lost. Like Cincinnati beat them, and then they beat the Chiefs the following week as well. So you'd rather be the better team, but it's such an advantage, Matthew. And they play the Bucs at home Monday night. They play Denver at home. They go to Buffalo, Kansas City, and then it's Carolina after that. They've got the Raiders again, Denver twice. It's pretty playable. And I feel like maybe the likeliest record for the Chiefs is 13-4, but 13-4 is 6-4 the rest of the year. Does that sound like what they'll do? Maybe better than that? So if they get to 14 wins, these teams, the Ravens have 3 losses. They can't lose another game to get to 14 wins. And they've lost to Kansas City. They have to be better than the Chiefs. The Bills get to play the Chiefs. And Houston is sitting at 6-2, and they have the Jets on Thursday night. So long way to go. But Allen and Jackson are both at points in their careers where like that's what it's about. If it wasn't already. And very interesting stuff in the AFC. Bengals down, AFC East otherwise in shambles. Nobody else, Colts included, in these other divisions, looks very competent. So it probably should come down to the same 3 guys, if not Burrow. as well. I don't know about Pittsburgh. Like I still, their schedule gets super hard, and they're 6-2. I'm not expecting they get to like 11 wins, but they seem to always figure out some way to get in.
I think we've reached a point where it's very Manning, Brady, Roethlisberger like with Jackson, Allen, and Mahomes. And Mahomes is Brady, but those other two guys, they're going to get theirs, I think, eventually. The thing about Jackson is he is throwing the ball spectacularly. They just got him another weapon, but their defense stinks. It's just not good. And I don't think their offensive line is good either. Henry's running his butt off, and that may peter out as the season goes along, and he gets a little more worn down. And it's Jackson in the pocket throwing the ball, which can work in the regular season. Sometimes it hasn't always worked in the playoffs as well. If he's not really leaning into that scrambling game when the defenses are better, that's so interesting to me. But if you're ranking the strength of the teams, I mean, McDermott's defense is once again very, very good. That was why he was hired, and he's paid off in that side of the ball. And you just can never doubt what Kansas City is going to do. You just can't say, oh, well, it's not lucky that you just win 7 games in a row the way that they've done it. It's maybe awkward, but I don't think with that quarterback that it's luck.
Well, if those are the 3 teams, I don't either. Of those 3 teams, like the Bills or the Ravens, at least at this pace, are going to have to beat 2 of them.
Yeah.
Just to get to the Super Bowl versus only 1 if you're the Chiefs. So that's a huge difference. And respectfully toward McDermott, I mean, the stats are incredible. The consistency is incredible with injuries on defense. In the playoffs, they've gotten just absolutely gashed, though. Yep. And so single game matchups where it really comes down to a coach's ability to be different, unpredictable. What are the single moments here where we can basically get through? And the Chiefs, Spagnuolo for the Chiefs, it's not just Reed. Like, he's been so good at that. And those key plays, they have what? Their last 10 road games, including playoffs, have all been 1-score wins. I mean, that's nuts. And they're not shootouts. The Chiefs don't score anymore. So that'll be it. There'll be a regular season meeting here, like I said, coming up in Buffalo, Chiefs and Bills. But in the last 4 years, the Bills have lost to Kansas City in the playoffs 3 times, including at home last year. And that's been what this season's all about. I'm in here every day talking about them to a Buffalo audience, and once in a while I'll say, like, you realize none of this matters, right? Like the only things that were going to matter this year were, getting to the playoffs, and then it'll be that, or if they don't make it, and they're on the division is over pretty much already. So I've got to find new things to talk about.
Yeah, I remember we talked about this, about how only January and maybe February matters to Buffalo. So you just sort of kick around things for a while, waiting for the playoffs to happen when you're in one of those situations. I imagine if you're the Chiefs media, you're like, do I write an article about the kicker, or not the kicker there, maybe the I don't know, the third string tackle who plays the flute or something. I mean, you just wait around until you get to the playoffs. That's probably how it was for the Buffalo writers in the 90s. Let's just, pace yourselves, guys. Pace yourselves.
I mean, and you and I are both cut from the same kind of cloth, where that's not always better. We want to have the content. So
I know for sure. Yeah.
I look at Buffalo and my life in radio here the last 5 years as win-win, because if they win, everybody's happy. And if they don't, all right, now it's a more interesting show.
Right, now I have something to break down. I guess I was thinking about the AFC, as it's kind of been figured out already, and I can't wait for the playoffs. And the NFC, I can't wait to see how this all sorts itself out.
I know.
Because if the Vikings end up with 12 wins still, 13, I wouldn't even be shocked based on their schedule. But if they end up with 8, like, it could happen. There's a wide range of things that could happen to this Vikings team. The Packers with the quarterback injury, the 49ers, they're still hanging around. The Rams all of a sudden are interesting after that. Yeah, I mean, Dallas could turn around, but they get players back. I mean, it's so interesting in that race, the regular season, whereas the AFC, we're just like, all right, let's simulate to the end. Thursday night, why don't you just fly here and stab my face with a fork rather than watching Aaron Rodgers play on national TV again. You know what I love to watch national TV games? The guy who hates playing. That's what I really, really enjoy. The close-ups of, why did someone run a wrong route on me again? I got to tell you, I usually just watch, and whatever happens, we'll break it down. When New England had the ball driving, I was like, come on, Jacoby Brissett. Come on, buddy. I will buy your jersey if you score a touchdown right here. That was enjoyable. That was enjoyable football. So what do we got for higher lowers of Houston and the Jets?
Well, first of all, the Jets are favored at home tomorrow night by 2. And what? Yeah, when it's like that, I always want to sort of defer to it, So I would be on the Jets in this game, being favored. The Jets through 8 games, minus 20 point differential at 2-6. Houston at 6-2 is plus 9. These teams have kind of, by that statistic at least, been almost the same this year. And now the Texans lose Diggs, and they're already without Collins, and they don't really want to throw the ball anyway. So for building a pick'em on underdog, I'm starting there. Like the Jets are my pick in this game. How do they do it? So since the coordinator change, although this went back the other way last week, I don't really know why, but they went from an interesting sort of split in the backfield between Breece Hall and Braylon Allen to just Breece Hall. Again, last week, Allen, I think he even scored. Like he got in the mix a little bit more. So you can't, I certainly don't know what their intentions are, but I'm going higher to start on Breece Hall, 66.5 rushing yards. If the Jets are the play in this game, then one of the best running backs in the league is going to clear 66.5 rushing yards on a Thursday night in a winning game script like that. I'm starting there.
Okay.
So it's time for Davante Adams to score. They did this. If they have a good night, Adams, or rather Rodgers, if they're first and goal at the 3, will throw the ball to Adams on 4 straight plays, if that's what it takes. So I'm not going into Breece Hall touchdown. I want a Davante Adams touchdown. So that's 2. You and I, the whole reason for the pick'em life that we live, Tyler Conklin.
Yes. Yes. Let's go.
Conk Daddy. It's 2.5 receptions. Okay.
That's happening.
Okay. Lazard probably out again. Give me 3 catches for Tyler Conklin. Higher. And then you got to pick somebody on the other side. And I'm just going to go lower on Stroud's passing yards.
Okay.
This is where I think I'm most vulnerable, because if the Jets do sort of pull away in this game, then it's garbage time. And then I could get stuck. I guess I'm calling it now, preparing to get stuck on Stroud, clearing 225.5 passing yards in the fourth quarter. It's not a high number really either, but that's a run first team. So I've got a game where the Jets are the side. Houston wants to run the ball every week. They're without Diggs. They're trying to figure out what their passing game is. And they went to the Jets last year and got demolished. And that's, of course, without Rodgers, and everybody was in love with Stroud in Houston last year, but they lost that game like by 20 or something, 31-12 maybe, some gross, in the rain, some score like that. I don't know the weather for this game. I do know it's 74 in Western New York today, and tomorrow's Halloween. But you can't go over on the temperature. So we're going, or higher, I should say.
Yes.
We're going high. I think I got away with that because that was not football related. I'm hoping. Higher on Breece Hall rushing, higher on Tyler Conklin receptions, higher on 0.5 rush or receiving touchdowns on Adams, an end around works, and then lower on Stroud passing yards.
Okay. And just a reminder that you all can play along at Underdog Fantasy by using the promo code PURPLE, which many of you have, and I greatly appreciate that. So I don't know if Robert Woods actually plays a lot for this team. I think he has 5 catches on the year, but to score a touchdown, you get odds here of 5 times your money if he scores a touchdown. Red zone, they have no other receivers left. As far as my random play, which has kind of been hit or miss with these guys, I almost want to go with they're going to throw the ball to Robert Woods and he may have a chance to score a touchdown. It's a long shot, but that's what that pick always is. I also think that it's worth noting in terms of your Stroud, the Jets have great corners. I mean, they really made life difficult on Justin Jefferson. Very, very few people actually do that. So that they have a great defense. That defense for the last 3 years could have taken them anywhere they wanted to go, but instead they fiddled around with Zach Wilson, who will show up 3 years from now as a good starting quarterback somewhere, and then Aaron Rodgers.
I remember the Jets corners mocking Jefferson in that game, like doing this all the time because after every incomplete pass, Jefferson would be like, "Where's the flag?"
Yes.
I don't know what the odds are because I didn't look at that, but I like Mechie.
Oh, Mechie. You think that's a better one than Woods? Probably, right?
I think Mechie comes in over Woods. I mean, Woods is late stage here.
Yeah.
They also have, is it Hutchinson? They have another receiver
Xavier Hutchinson,
named Hutchinson. He's played in Collins' absence, but nothing has happened there. So I would put Mechie on top, and there's Schultz too. I looked at Schultz for this. I think it was 4.5 catches, and in my mind, I've just got like sort of a jet game script, so I didn't get there. But that's the kind of the tight end could have one of these tight end games if it's like that, where he goes like 8 for 39.
One of these tight end games. Come on, Kyle Pitts owners, finally, welcome to the party, everybody. After last week.
Nope. I mean, that's right. They're big fluke plays. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I'm one of those people. I have tons of Kyle Pitts from dynasty leagues since he got drafted. I was Pitts over Jamar Chase in those rookie drafts when that happened, but he just does not look very good athletically, I think. And they're just not the so-called easy button plays where, you can really rely on that. Like, maybe Andrews has been in his career, or certainly George Kittle is different. Certain of these guys, the Pitts plays in Tampa were like a 45-yard touchdown, and then another one where he looked like he fumbled, but they gave it to him. So, you can be optimistic. He's alive, but like I'm starting Ferguson over him this week for Dallas against Atlanta, same game. And some of those, Engram for sure, with the Jacksonville injuries, and Njoku, I think for sure this week, all would start for me over Pitts.
All right. Well, a lot going on in the National Football League. So thank you, Roger Goodell, for providing that for us. And we will talk again next week after the Vikings have played the Colts, and we have a bunch of new developments. Thank you, Mike Schopp, the Deep End Fantasy Football Podcast, and we'll catch y'all very soon.